I think we might be, I think we might be live. Hey Jay, how's it going?
Awesome. Living the dream.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so it's 12:01. I think we have folks who are starting to join, which is good. And I think we'll give it just another minute. You can see my screen, Jay, my little welcome to our webinar screen.
I can.
Excellent, excellent. Very good, very good. So how is the weather where you are, Jay? Is it sunny and
Oh, it's
warm?
a sunny day.
Nice, nice. It is sunny here, but it is cold. The wind is blowing. It is like, I don't know, 45 to, I don't know how cold it is. It's just not spring quite yet. So, um, all righty. So Michelle just posted in our chat, which is great. So for those of you who are joining us now, please do jump into the chat and uh, tell us who you are, introduce yourself, and let us know what's your favorite analytics technique. This should be a fun session today. All right, we have Kirsten. Hi, Kirsten. I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see something. Excellent. Good. There's Audrey's there. Fantastic. All right, great. Well, as you come into the session, like I said, give us your favorite analytics technique if you care to. And there's also a Q&A button. So you can click on that anytime during the session and ask a question live, which would be great. I think we're going to get started. It's 2 minutes after 12, and we will move along here. So welcome everybody to our Ask Dr. J Advanced Analytics session. This should be fun. I love talking with Dr. J, and I don't have a lot of time to do it these days. So whenever I have the opportunity, I think let's do it. So this was our brainchild together, that we would just come on and answer people's questions. We have a lot of questions that came to us for folks who registered for the webinar. So thank you to everyone who submitted a question. We likely will not get to them all, but the ones we don't get to, we'll look to put a response together and email you separately as best we can. So as we get started, I'll introduce myself and I'll hand it over to Jay. I'm Lori Vellucci. I'm the practice leader for financial services at CMB. And I've been at CMB for about a decade and in market research for 3 times as long as that. I will say that when I joined CMB, one of the reasons why I came was because of our amazing advanced analytics department. And I can tell you that I personally have learned an incredible amount over the last 10 years as it relates to advanced analytics techniques. So I'm always grateful for that. And I'll turn it over to Jay to introduce himself.
Thanks, Lori. Yep, Jay Weiner. Like Lori, I've been at CMB for just north of 10 years, in the industry, close to 3 decades. Always in the same sort of advanced analytics hat wearing role, managing a bunch of really talented people throughout my career. And it's great to be here today. Thank you.
Excellent, fantastic. For those of you who do not know CMB, just a quick bit about us. We're a leading insights and strategy consultancy based in Boston. We serve some of the world's largest brands. We work in partnership to understand target audiences. We apply world-class AI and analytics to drive insights and tell stories. And really, we're just looking to, inspire our stakeholders and help them to make an impact in their business. One of our core focuses is blending AI and human intelligence, or AI plus HI, to drive better outcomes. So we've been leaning in quite a bit there in the last, 1 year to 18 months. So that's just a bit about us. Of course, you can learn a lot more if you go to our website. And we're going to talk today about segmentation, a little bit about pricing, trade-off, discrete choice, driver analysis, how those things fit into decision making. But before we do that, Michelle has a little poll for the audience. So I think she's going to post that for us. Here it is. So have you ever second guessed yourself on an analytics technique that you had selected to solve a business challenge? So pick yes, no, unsure. And as soon as we see the votes coming in, Michelle will share where we end up with that. I feel like we should have like the Jeopardy jingle, right? Like, doo, 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 doo. Anyway, um, this has been figuring out what analytics techniques to use has been a major growth area for me. Like I said, when I came to CMB and just learned so much from our analytics team and how we can creatively apply analytics. That's one thing I can always count on with our team is to come up with really just elegant solutions to pretty challenging questions. All right, Michelle, what do we have? Ah, okay, good, good, good. So I am in good company. We have the vast majority of people who have, in fact, second guessed themselves on an analytics technique. So good, you've come to the right place. And thank you for answering our poll question. And I will close that. And then I'm going to stop sharing and we are going to dive right into our first questions. And just as a reminder, please do drop your questions in the chat as we go along. All right, so first off, our first question, Jay, in your experience, which advanced analytics techniques are the most used or most requested by clients, and which ones are overlooked or underutilized?
So I'll touch on the underutilized probably. I'm a huge fan of perceptual maps throughout my career. I find clients either love them or hate them. If the client hates them, I have failed to ever convince them they should love them. So I find that they tend not to get used as much as they probably should. Probably the most used tool in the toolbox is driver modeling. Not
Yeah.
exactly the most fun thing for analytics folks to do, but probably 80, 90% of the jobs that leave the shop all have some sort of driver model attached. And the next two techniques that are in fact a lot of fun to do, segmentation and discrete choice.
Yeah, no, discrete choice is my favorite for sure. Can you say a little bit more about the perceptual mapping? Like, tell us what you love about it and why do the clients who dislike it, or what should clients who don't use it know in order to get them to use them more?
Well, it's essentially a 2D representation of a table of numbers.
Yeah,
So me personally, I'd always rather look at a picture or a chart, a nice plot, as opposed to a table full of numbers. Some of the tools, like correspondence maps, the axes don't have labels, and that's one of the challenges for clients, is they don't understand what the X and the Y axes represent. It's more about labeling the space, which is probably why I've failed over the years to convince people who don't like them to actually like them.
yeah, understood. So driver modeling, you say it's not a favorite technique for analytics folks, but it's the number one thing that I know we include driver modeling a lot.
Yeah, everybody always wants to know, how do I improve some key performance metric, whether it be likelihood to continue, likelihood to recommend, overall satisfaction, whatever it is. Clients typically have limited resources to focus, and so there might be 12 to 15, maybe 20 possible areas that you could work on to improve that key performance metric.
Yeah.
So driver modeling is a way of looking at or prioritizing the list of things that you can fix,
Mm-hmm.
trading off what the biggest hit is versus the cost. Years ago, we used to do a lot of work in the cellular space, and the biggest complaint was drop calls, and the biggest solution to that is more towers. Well, more towers cost millions.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's a trade-off between how much impact am I going to get and what's it going to cost me to do it.
Sure. So just because we know that that's the solution doesn't mean it's the answer for the business itself, given the cost to implement some of the solutions that might lead to the outcome we want. Um, in terms of using driver modeling to predict or to I know we've created like sort of, simulators that allow us to sort of say, hey, how much will we move one measure if we improve other measures? Can you use driver modeling in that way as well? Or is it generally a different technique that you're using for that?
Well, I mean, there's two primary forms of driver model. One is a kind of a ranking of the importance of this attribute or benefit in moving the KPI, but it doesn't tell you how much. If I
Yeah.
increase it by 10%, what's that going to do? We need some kind of coefficient-based driver model. So if
Mhm.
we know, most of the time the client just wants a prioritization of these the top three most important things. Sometimes they actually do want to know if I dial this up by 5%, what's that going to do? So we do a lot of net promoter score simulators where we can figure out how I move people from detractor to passive and passive to promoter. And by improving my customer service interaction touch points, how much movement am I going to see in those three segments?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's good. Let me go into the next question, which this one I liked a lot. Somebody asks, I have never heard of methods like discriminant analysis being used in the industry, even though I've learned about it in grad school, along with other techniques perhaps, or methods that don't seem to sort of translate into the market research world. How does that method fit into what we do in market research?
Yeah, I was real lucky when I was in grad school. My major professor in grad school owned a market research company. So we actually had a more applied market research tools in the toolbox. There are a lot of tools that are in the toolbox that actually were covered in grad school that we still use. We just typically don't refer to them that way, or people don't pay any attention. We use discriminant function analysis a lot.
And
Uh,
how does it, what is it? So if you're using discriminant function analysis, what is the technique that the client would recognize? Like
well,
what, how,
that is the absolute technique, but we're building sort of a predictive model. It's like a
okay,
driver model, except the dependent variable is categorical. Right?
okay,
So the primary engine for discriminant function is in typing tools for segmentation.
got
Right.
it.
So the client's vocabulary, they typically hear typing tool. I ask these 15 questions. My typing algorithm is 90% accurate or whatever it is in predicting my 6 segment solution. A lot of times the clients don't really care how you did it, just that it did it and they understand how it works.
Got it. Okay. So when you're creating a typing tool, it very well may be using a discriminant analysis, even though we're not saying it's using a discriminant analysis to do so.
Correct.
All right, that makes good sense to me. Next question. This is a good one for you. How should we approach research to establish pricing strategy and set pricing in a category where one, customers don't currently understand how or how much they pay. Two, the service is delivered through a financial advisor who helps translate the value. Three, customer expectations are changing. And four, margins are at risk given newer category entrants. That's a good one. I love when we have a question that helps me to stump you, Jay.
Well, there's all kinds of tools in the toolbox for pricing research. And so a lot of times we're looking at price elasticity. So a lot of times it depends on where we are in the product development process. Are we trying to screen out ideas to determine is the market big enough and will people pay enough money for me to make money in this space versus I'm about to go to market with this, what price should I charge in the marketplace prior to launch to do whatever the outcome desired is. Typically there's two possible focuses. One is maximizing share,
Mhm.
and maximizing share is a great technique for keeping potential entrants out of the space. Because if you're thinking about going into the market and you're looking at the price leader, you have to figure out how am I going to compete given the market leader in the price point and make a profit on top of that. So it's very hard for people to come into the market if other people have priced for share versus pricing for max revenue, which if we have some kind of protection, patent protection, early product development advantage, like it's going to take the competitors some period of time to replicate this or get close to it, we might be able to skim, set a higher price point to maximize our profits in the short run. If we're doing sort of um, starter kits and refill kinds of things, a lot of companies will choose to maximize the revenue on the refill and
Mhm.
maximize the trial or penetration or share of the starter kit, because once you've invested in the starter kit, it's the original Gillette. Give the the handles away for free, charge for the blades.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've
Mm-hmm.
got invested a few bucks in a Swift or a wet mop or whatever it is, you sort of have a cognitive dissonance about it sitting in the cupboard. You might as well buy the refills to
Sure.
use the implement that you bought. And a lot of times, like we test things that are brand new to the world, and so like we tested floor cleaning robots probably 5 years before they actually came on the marketplace. And so a lot of times you have to educate consumers about what this is going to replace, right? So it's not
Mm-hmm.
so much about what it is, it's what it's replacing or what it isn't. So you think
Mm-hmm.
about the original Swiffer wet mops or whatever, what they replace, a stick mop and a bucket and a bottle of Lysol.
Yeah.
And so it's, educating consumers about what's the alternative. And
Yeah.
sometimes if the consumers don't have any idea, we might provide a framework. Typically your question about financial services,
Yeah.
people have a managed portfolio, whatever, may not know how many basis points they're paying their advisor to
That's
manage
right.
their portfolio. And so sometimes you can just provide them typical advisors charge, 1 to 3 basis points. Discrete choice is another way we might capture on the, not in case of people not knowing, but capturing whether they're willing to pay
Mm-hmm.
those particular prices.
Yeah, and I was going to bring that up in this particular example, being able to set the stage as to if they don't know, for understanding whether they know what they're paying or not. And perhaps that becomes a filter for us as well, right? How do people, people who have no idea what they're currently paying, how does the pricing questions net out versus those who do? The other thing that's interesting here in this category is consumers value knowing, right? Like when you survey them, they're like, yes, I do want them to tell me what they're paying, right? Or what I'm paying. But yet I'm not sure that that's A, entirely true, or B, something that they consider more than once when they're making a decision, even though that sort of charge continues to happen. I think that's another challenge here in terms of sort of setting pricing strategy. What do you do with that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's the case, like especially in financial services, your willingness to pay 3 basis points might be very different if the advisor is returning 10% versus 5% versus minus 5%.
Yeah.
Right. So like if the better your advisor can perform, the more willing you might be to actually share, some of that gain. And so that, that's also part of the thing is, that's part of the great unknown and in today's uncertainty too. I'm one of those guys that's sitting there watching my 401k evaporate
Yeah.
daily, wondering why I am paying my financial advisor. And I just talked to him the other day. And I said, I know you're not trying to lose my money.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. A question just came through in the Q&A that's related. It says, you mentioned educating consumers about something that doesn't exist. How do you tackle concept testing something that doesn't exist today without over explaining?
Well, that's always the challenge too. Clients always want to know up front, how much should I say about this? And a lot of it comes down to how much are you going to put behind your marketing campaign? The more money you're going to spend in developing, or educating people in the marketplace about the launch, the more explanation you can provide. So years ago, we tested high definition TVs before they ever came to market. Now, that's not revolutionary product. It's still a television, but it's
Right.
significantly more expensive. We tested voice activated speakers where you can say, hey, Google or Alexa or whatever it is, and your speaker talks back to you. Now, the speaker wasn't new to the world, but that technology was new to the world. And so sometimes you have to explain to people what this thing does or what they're going to gain from it uh, enough
Yeah.
where they can add the value. Clients always say when the results come back from pricing research, you're telling me to lower my price. I'm like, that's absolutely not what I'm telling you. What I'm
Yeah.
telling you is the price you wish to charge, the consumer didn't get the value of the proposition. So
Right.
it's not a case of you need to lower your price. It's you need to rewrite your value prop, go in there and
Right.
explain something, or maybe you picked the wrong thing to say. Maybe there's
Yeah.
3 things that you could say, gets my teeth whiter, fights cavities, prevents tartar. Which one of those 3 things is going to demonstrate the most value in buying
Yeah.
toothpaste?
Yeah, and I would add that when you're developing concepts, focusing on the benefits. So the way to avoid over-explaining is not to get into the weeds, but to communicate the benefit instead, right? So I think about in an example that's been around for a long time. Um, sleep aids. For years, it was about fall asleep faster, right? It was like fall asleep in 5 minutes, fall asleep in 2 minutes, fall asleep, before you walk in the door. It started getting, and a competitor came in and changed the conversation. And it was no longer about fall asleep faster. It was about wake up refreshed. So getting to the actual benefit for the consumer and then describing in a way that's succinct, and not over explaining in terms of getting too deep into details, but being pretty pointed and specific about the benefits it provides, I think is really important when you're getting into concept testing. And then to your point, Jay, being able to also include, test your concept, but then let's do a max diff or something against, all of the benefits you possibly could be talking about, or a DCM, depending on what we have. But get more bang for your buck, if you will, from your concept test. Come away with not only an evaluation of the concept that you've created, but also some ways in which you might make it better. So I love that question. Somebody just asked that, which is fantastic. So thank you for that. Okay, so moving on, we're talking about segmentation. When modeling for segmentation, how do we accommodate for the very small, hard to reach segments? What should we keep in mind when we include them, and how do we answer stakeholders' questions about how representative they are if the base size is so small?
Yeah, I mean, we have what we call the population correction factor. So if the population is small, we have ways of dealing with the margin of error around whatever sample we might collect. But we tend to believe that, hard to reach segments or small segments are more homogeneous in nature. Like there's only so many thoracic surgeons in the market buying medical devices to help them with their job. So there's always a limit to how many you're going to get when you're trying to do those things. If you're segmenting, if that segment is truly homogeneous, it should stick together. And that's part of the problem with some of the tools in the toolbox is they're looking for something north of 50 in a cell when they're trying to segment the market. So if you have 30 to 50 people and they are homogeneous, they'll end up staying in the same sort of segment, and that segment will never split. And so one of two things, it is genuinely one segment, or there are other tools in the toolbox. So there are tools that do work better. K-means tends to work a little better than some of the other tools for small segments, especially if you know how many segments there are in that. So we might run a hierarchical analysis on 30 respondents to figure out how many segments and then seed the clusters. TMI, I'm sure, for most folk who don't want to get into the weeds with stats, but we have things that we can do if there are, a small segment does appear. And then it always comes down to, in segmentation, clients are always typically making the error decision about the biggest segment is the most profitable.
Right.
And in fact, the biggest segment is probably not the most profitable because it's the segment everybody's after.
That's right.
So some sort of smaller niche segments are typically easier to defend and more profitable.
Yeah, that's fair. And that leads me to think about internal segmentations of customers. So when we do a behavioral segmentation of a client's customer database and we're coming up with segments based on behavior, they can be small sometimes, but the value is that you can also overlay metrics on how profitable is each individual, what is their lifetime value. There's a lot of ways that you can be appending the type of data that leads you to analyze, as you say, should we even bother with this segment? I know we did something like that. This was going back a number of years where our client was designing an experience for a particular group of people. And when we did the internal segmentation, what we learned is that particular group of people, they did segment nicely, but they were not profitable. They were the ones who were using the expensive services the most. So they were calling customer service on the phone a whole lot more than other people were, so they were rechanneling from digital to telephone and things like that, it suddenly became like, oh, wait, why are we trying to accommodate them? And led to a bit of a reprioritization of resources, once they were able to know that. So that's a really good point. Um, the next one, this is always a great question. How do we know when it's time to refresh segmentation? Is there something analytics can do to help us to determine this?
So yeah, so the first flag for I mean, there's a variety of things that cause segmentation to have a shorter lifespan. So new entrants to the marketplace. We have some new competitors that have just shown up, new products in the category, like the Crest Colgate, Crest Total, Colgate Complete, or Crest Complete, Colgate Total changed the segmentation for toothpaste when they came out. So new products. But the first sort of red flags that your segments may have outlived the possible use of would be the sizes have changed. So if we
Yeah.
start out and we have a 6 segment solution and the biggest segment is 15% and the smallest segment is 5%, and then all of a sudden we collect and score a sample into that and we have a 40% change in one of the segments, it suggests either a bunch of people moved, which is
Right.
probably not very likely, or your segmentation has outlived its application and we should start again. Now, to validate that, we could go certainly collect another sample from people answering the full questionnaire of items that was used to create that solution
Mm-hmm.
and then score people into it and crosstab those two newly clustered solution versus the scored solution to see how much overlap we have. And that would be an indication if there's not a lot of overlap, the world changed. People's
Yeah.
attitudes have changed. I mean, that's one of the things that we see is people's usage of the product changes your beliefs about what's important to it. Like if you went to buy your first laptop, you decided I need a terabyte hard drive, and so you went and you bought one, and then you realize, well, everything's on the cloud. Didn't really need that, but boy, I wished I'd got 32, megabit of data, or I mean,
Yeah.
RAM, right? So that your importances might change over time just through the usage of the products, causing the segmentation solution, or at least maybe what we say to the segments to be different.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that answer. Um, Next question. Imagine a survey which asks respondents about their awareness of a brand's physical manifestation, i.e., different types of physical locations, as well as overall consideration of the brand. What are some different analytical approaches one could take to understand the predictive relationship and relative strength of each type of location's awareness on overall brand consideration? So different types of locations, and how does awareness of those types um, predict brand consideration? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, so a couple of, one of the things that popped into my head when I saw that was recently one of my former colleagues at Suffolk University was working on a project with their class, and somebody has invented a coffee kiosk. And it's a fully robotic coffee machine sitting in a parking lot. And you get an app and you can order your, custom coffee beverage, and it will be piping hot and made to order when you drive into the parking lot to this kiosk to pick it up. Right. So companies might have a kiosk like that. They might have a small cafe. They might have a full cafe that's a standalone location. They might have a drive-through window, whatever these kinds of locations might be. So you could ask folks about their awareness of each of these locations for that particular brand and put that awareness into your driver model to see, does increasing the awareness of that coffee kiosk in parking lots increase consideration for buying the brand. And then as I thought through that, one of the things that might also be important is not only the awareness for the location or the format, but the proximity to something.
Mm-hmm.
Proximity to your house, proximity to work, proximity to your gym or whatever it might be. And so maybe that's a kind of a double edge. Not only do we need awareness, but we need to know you're aware of it's close enough to you to actually use it. Because the
Mm-hmm.
fact that there's a, full service Starbucks 12 miles from my house
Yeah.
versus one in the Target store 3 miles from my house might sort of change my consideration of using the brand. And that's
That's
something that you could put into a discrete choice. So you could actually put the locations into the a discrete choice as an attribute. It's available here. Now we've created 100% awareness, so it's not
right.
truly answering the question about how does the awareness, but it does show you how much adding that location to your offer does. And then you can build into that the proximity to that particular location as part of the choice benefits.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting pivot. Uh, So back to the awareness piece of it. Should we also be measuring how, what comes to mind for me is there may be an instance where if I'm only aware that you have, Starbucks inside of the Targets, right? That's all I'm aware of. My consideration of the brand or my perception of the brand equity, for example, may be different than if I know that you've got kiosks and in-store locations and standalone places where I can walk in and sit down. So sort of the idea that, that like sort of robust options as far as locations are concerned, I'm aware of that. And how does that impact my consideration of the brand? Not in so much as, um, I'm going to pick one to use and that's what's important, but more like the presence of these different locations gives me a different perception of the brand. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I mean, you can certainly put that into the driver model. So each of those things is you're aware of it, aware of that particular location. And so you'll get an importance of having those locations and driving favorability of the brand, consideration of the brand, whatever it might be. Now, it may be that running those driver models by people who are aware of specific,
Yeah.
right, which will put that as a constant because they'll be 100% aware for that particular, but you'll see if there's some people who are aware of something else on top of that, or do some kind of turf analysis to look at how do I reach the most people in terms of the locations that they're aware of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. I like that answer. Thank you for that. There's another question that came through. It says, how do you convince colleagues to use advanced analytics given time and cost constraints? So I'm not sure that this is an analytics question per se, but I think it does speak to the idea of, can we show the value of what they're going to get versus if you don't do it? Like you ought to spend the money to do the analytics because it's going to give you a much better solution. I wonder if you've run up against that and have thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, there are occasions where the trade-off between sample size and analytic costs is well worth investing in the analytics. You think about doing monadic concept testing where I need 200 to 300 respondents in each cell. I have a limited number of cells I can afford to test. Whereas if I tested it with some kind of experimental design methodology, discrete choice, conjoint, whatever it is, I can test more versions of that with a smaller sample because it's within respondent testing. So sometimes there are trade-offs. And the other possible gain is in order, like a lot of times people say, well, I'm going to just weed the number of concepts down. Well, in my mind, I'd rather have consumers vote
Yeah.
as opposed to the internal people, because you may leave something really useful on the cutting room floor. Like you may
Mhm.
decide I can't afford to test this particular concept, and that might be a winner. And so a
Yeah,
lot of
and
times analytics is allowing you to test more benefits, more combinations, whatever it might be. And so it's well worth the gained information from, testing more things with a responded or using the tools in our toolbox.
yeah, and what that reminded me of is the idea of runway, right? Like product development runway. So the results of the analytics or the ability to utilize them for product development kind of lives on. So I've figured out what is the product I need to produce today and prioritize my resources that way. And then also like, and in 6 months or and in a year or and in whatever, what is the next feature or benefit I ought to be looking at and adding in order to either maximize reach or improve product, whatever it might be. So I think from a value of the analytics perspective, if you can sort of amortize it over a much longer period of time, like I'm going to be able to use this research for a lot longer than if we just kind of figure out what's the best concept. And as you say, Jay, leave stuff on the cutting room floor and just test our idea without analytics. All right, those are all of the questions that come. Michelle, I wonder if there are any additional questions that you have. I know you've been monitoring.
There haven't been any additional questions coming through the chat. I think you can proceed and keep going. You're answering them throughout.
All right, good. Let's see, one more question on segmentation. How do you decide a segmentation solution is the best one? And what is your best advice for honing in on the right segmentation model?
So, we always talk about segmentation being a combination of art and science. So you run the solutions out, and there are statistical metrics to tell you that the segmentation scheme is worthy of considering versus not worthy of considering. And when I say worthy of considering, it might be a set of solutions so that segments 4 through 7 might be of value to the client. And mathematically, there's not a huge difference between them in terms of how robust they are. And so it's basically going and profiling these things. And in my mind, the best way to realize that the segmentation scheme is a winner is when you're sitting in a work session with the client and everybody can see themselves in one of the segments.
Yeah,
Like if you're a consumer of the product, you ought to be able to relate to one of the segments.
yeah,
And that's where you can just sort of see everybody's, the light bulb go off and say, wow, that's me. Yeah, I am
yeah,
that segment. And it also helps kind of bring them to life. But there is no one right answer. I mean, different companies in the exact same space could have very different solutions. So it just depends on what's actionable to you. What are you going to do? Are we trying to build new products? Is it for new product development? Are we trying to say things? What am I going to say to the segments? So
yeah,
what if it comes down and, we have sort of scoring things that we consider. So when we're looking at the possible solutions, we'll look at how well does it hold together? Does it profile well? Can I find these people in the wild going forward? Can I develop
yeah,
a typing tool with an abbreviated set of questions that's accurate enough? Can I score my database?
yeah,
Sometimes the client wants to take the solution and score their internal database. And so we typically weigh out sort of these things because then it becomes a trade-off. Maybe increasing the accuracy of scoring the database might be really important, but it comes at a watering down of the profiles of the segments or whatever it is. And so we make informed decisions about how well does the solution perform on all of the criteria and which of those criteria are most important to us.
yeah. And we try to set those criteria up front if we can, and then measure the possible solutions against that. But that's the art part of it, and that's actually the part that I love the most. We just had a few questions that just came through. I know we're getting a bit long here, but let me see if I can ask a couple of them. One is, when is the right scenario to use SEM path modeling?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of SEM. We got really excited in the late 90s when SEM became sort of available to the market research community from a tool perspective. And we jumped up and down and got so excited about it because we saw it as the solution to dealing with multicollinearity and other things in driver models. Unfortunately, it did not prove to be stable wave over wave as near as we would have hoped it would have been.
Mhm.
So we have other tools that we like to use in place of SEM, Bayesian networks being one of them. Uh, but the primary reason for doing those kinds of things is to come up with a view of how do the variables interact with each other. All right, so we have a construct that says customer service, and then we have friendliness of the operator, speed at which the phone was answered, number of times it took to get my problem resolved, are all part of this customer service factor. So it's a nice way of kind of looking at the structure of the model and understanding the individual levers that I can pull and the overall factor that is impacted by those levers.
Good, thank you for that. I have one last question. If you were building a driver's analytics, if you were building a driver's analytics model that can explain drivers of NPS by different customer segments using customer ratings, what coefficient or metric would you use to quantify the impact of that specific driver on NPS?
Yeah. The tool we like most for uh, predictive models is MARS, multi-attribute regression splines, because they make no assumptions about the linear relationship between the variables. It allows for the value of having missing data if we have any missing data. But the biggest thing in terms of doing any NPS work is to segment people into those three buckets to begin with. It's a huge leap to think I can move somebody from being a detractor to a promoter. So we typically split the data set and we figure out, how do I get detractors to become passive, and how do I get passives to become promoters? In the future, we think then if I moved you from detractor to passive, then I can move you from passive to promoter at the next round or sometime in the future. But that's really the key to working on NPS, is understanding, how do I reduce detractors and how do I increase promoters?
Thank you. Thank you for that. And that is the last question that we have time for. I'm going to share my screen for one more minute just to end our session. We'll be sending the recordings and slides to those of you who have joined us here today. In May, we're going to have another webinar on activation, which is fantastic. You can scan the QR code to download our Analytics one-pager, which is a bit of a cheat sheet, which I love. And of course, you can reach out to me or to Dr. J anytime with any of your questions. And Jay, my final question, if there was one skill that makes you great at what you do, what would that be?
It's, in my mind, thinking outside the box. I always like to ask clients what keeps you up at night, and then figure out if there's a solution.
Yeah.
One of the LinkedIn posts that somebody made plugged the fact that I always say no, which I very seldom ever say no, but that's the truth of the matter. But if I do say no, I will come back sometime within 24 hours and say I have a solution to that problem, because I can't I can't sleep at night if there's a problem out there. And most people who do what I do like puzzles.
Yeah.
I kind of see everything as a puzzle that needs to be put together or solved. And so that's, being able to take a client's business question and translate it to a research question is probably the greatest competency that I have.
Thank you, Jay. That's fantastic. I really appreciate all of you coming here today and listening to us chit chat with Dr. Jay. And Jay, thank you so much for your thoughtful responses and your always engaging and creative solutions that you develop for us at CMB. I hope everybody has a great day and join us in May for the next webinar.
Thanks all.
Bye, everyone.